Hope everybody is having a great day on this particular Friday and all along those lines. I see that I've got Dr. Steve Rao with me, so I'm getting ready to bring him on so that he can give his opening monologue and all in that space. By the way, I do hope that you enjoyed the episode two of our new series, Not Bound to Repeat. And in this particular one, we looked at the speech of LBJ. That's right, it was the speech around voting rights and all along those lines. So that was our second episode. The first one we had the debate between James Buckley and William Buckley. James Baldwin and William Buckley, and all along those lines, or at least that's the one I believe it was, but I'll double check that. But we definitely had LBJ and his speech around voting rights on this second episode, and all along those lines. But you're going to bring in Steve Rao, and I know he's got some opening remarks, but definitely that was an interesting speech, hearing him talk about the Great Society and, of course, some of the voting rights changes that he wanted to have enacted in the early 60s. Some of those issues are still pertinent today. But right now, we'll bring in Steve Rao for his opening remarks. I'm going to step aside, and of course, we'll have conversation with Lee Rhodes and whoever else shows up as well. But right now, we're turning it over to Steve Rao.
Well, good morning, Mark. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV, and we welcome you from all around the world and the United States of America to watch our international and national podcast, TV podcast. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, an increasingly turbulent world politically, economically, and sharing new ideas. And today, I greet you live from PBS Carolinas, where we had an engaging discussion. So today's topics, we're going to talk about what we talked about on PBS. And today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I joined my first appearance as a commentator on WPTF, one of the state's largest radio stations. I'm really excited about that. And I'm honored that they've announced me as a new commentator on the Nate Saunders or Steve O'Brien show. And so I want to begin today with my monologue talking about the issue today. We talked about the presidential election, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. I think it's important for us as we talk about the presidential race to realize a couple things. Historical precedent does not necessarily mean that a president with low approval ratings cannot get reelected. The nine last U.S. presidents, two of them had approval ratings above 50%. Jimmy Carter, 51%, and George H.W. Bush, 65%. Both of them lost the reelection bids. And we reelected presidents like Barack Obama, who had a 42% approval rating, George W. Bush, who actually had a higher approval rating, and of course, Bill Clinton, who was at 46%. So that's the first point I wanted to make today, that historical precedent does show that someone like Joe Biden can get reelected. What is Biden's greatest challenge? Well, he's had success with the Inflation Reduction Act, climate change, gun reform legislation, pandemic relief. He was able to vaccinate the American people successfully. But the elephant in the room is the economy. I mean, we've got inflation, rising gas prices, rising interest rates. And the question is, how will he be able to overcome those issues to show the American people that his policies have worked? Now, in this case, the economy could get better, but let's just face the music here. It looks like Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. You have a very old living president, 82, the oldest in history, against a former president. Both of them are unpopular within their own parties, 26%. Majority of Americans do not want to see either of these men elected as president. The only reason that Joe Biden won because of COVID and Donald Trump. And so if DeSantis is the nominee, I do believe the Republicans will be able to paint a picture that there's 44 years of age versus 82 years of age, that's going to be an incredible generational difference and could help the Republicans peel away young voters. That's going to be an important factor to consider. At the end of the day, I think it's fair to say that this will be round two, a rematch, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. I'll close with this. It's going to come down to four states: Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Those are the four swing states. Georgia and Arizona leaning Republican. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania went Democrats. They're very, very close. North Carolina, where Mark Lee and I live, 15 electoral college votes. Trump won last time by 1.4%. Going to be a close election. So we've got to do what we can to make sure that we're covering this election. This is going to be the race to talk about. We're going to talk about Disney as well and their efforts being made to move Disney, surprisingly enough, to North Carolina. Very, interesting legislation on the floor, and other issues around the world. But that's my take today. Joe Biden, Trump. We're going to bring in our panel. We're going to talk about this today for about 30 minutes, and just really have a healthy debate and dialogue about this. So, Mark, go ahead and bring all the other guests in. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in our regular panelists. By the way, we talked about that yesterday. We had Kelly Jones, who was a Democratic strategist and has definitely done some other stuff, including some space in the education space. And I actually agree with her. And it's kind of what you alluded to as well, that there has to be solid messaging. I would say solid messaging from both parties. And there definitely has to be an appeal to the young folks as well, because that is one of the things that Kelly brought up. And I'm sure that Lee was apparently impressed with her, as was Dan Worthington, and all along those lines. But that was some of the things that she brought up on the show where she was the guest yesterday. And one of the things is I bring in Lee and Dan Worthington as well. That was quite interesting. As I said, we started a new series last week, and it'll be on every Friday right before the news and all in that. And the new series is called Not Bound to Repeat, where we look at historical videos and historical information. And on this particular one, ironically, it was also from 1965. It was the speech that LBJ gave around voting rights, and some of that was also around some of the Great Society initiatives and all in that space. So it was quite interesting. And as we heard or listened to some of that speech, some of the things that LBJ was talking about, like making sure that everybody had the right to vote, that they were having access to societal things that they needed also to be productive citizens, were things that still resonate today. So that was one of the things that I found quite interesting as I was listening to that speech. And like I said, every week we'll bring a historical speech. Who knows? I may go back and dig up a Harry Truman speech or something else from history. And of course, if anybody's got any ideas of speeches that they would like to hear at that 9 o'clock hour before our 10 o'clock news, do let me know, because that is what Not Bound to Repeat is. Because, there's that old saying that if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. So that's why I came up with that title and all along those lines. But Lee, I don't know if you had a chance to watch it or if you'll go back and watch it.
I did not, but I do have a question for you. And this, in terms of voting, well, while everybody has a right to vote, I think we can all agree on that in terms of not everybody in the world. So every U.S. citizen has a right to vote. I think that we can agree on. Non-U.S. citizens, I'm opposed to that. There are those who think if they're here, they should vote. I don't understand that. But putting that issue aside, while everyone has a right to vote, does that mean that we should have no controls over voting? We have no things that you should be able to vote on. You should have to register. There should be controls in terms to make sure the person presenting is voting is the one who is voting, in terms of voter ID, voter integrity, because a lot of people question elections, whether there's any integrity or not in terms of these elections.
And like I said, that was one of the things that ironically I forgot that part of the speech, because like I said, that was some speech that I had probably heard way back when in terms of history classes and stuff like that. But one of the things that ironically LBJ was talking about was not so much, he did talk about how African Americans and other parts of society had been working together to get that Voting Rights Act passed. And like I said, there were other things that were associated with it as well. And some people are not the biggest fans of some of the things that were initiated with the Voting Rights Act, including stuff around welfare and other stuff. And I do know that there are some people that would like it to be, matter of fact, I think there's some current bills in place that it would be workfare, so that you wouldn't just get the money, you would also have to have some work attached to it. And this may surprise Dan, but I'm actually not opposed to that idea, because I don't think that you should have free money without having some sort of contribution to society that is attached to it as well. But the other thing that I forgot about, and that's what I was going to, was that he, of course, was from Texas. So he taught in his first job at a school that was actually majority Spanish. So he was actually talking about, while he's talking about voting rights in the sense of the African American population, he was also talking about voting rights for some of the Latin population as well. So that was covered in the speech. As a matter of fact, that was the closing part of the speech, because like I said, that was his first teaching job. And he was talking about how he did not even expect to be president. And some people that go for president, I know we're going to get into modern presidents and who may be or not running, and all in that space, that is one of the things.
Mark, is there any segment nowadays of U.S. citizenship that is prevented from voting? You know, it used to be women couldn't vote, blacks couldn't vote, what have you. But nowadays, is there any segment of the population that is prevented from voting?
Well, I would argue that there are segments that it is discouraged from voting, and there are things that are put in places. They may not be exactly the poll taxes, but there are ways that people are discouraged from voting, whether that is, getting them to stand in long lines and not providing food and other things that are out there. So I would,
providing food?
well, not so
Yeah.
much food, but I mean, like it was a long line, and there were
Oh, geez.
there were
Mark.
folks that would be trying. Hold on a second, Dan. There were folks who would be trying to give them, some comfort as they were doing that. I'm just saying that there are efforts that are there, and I'm not saying. Then I actually think that there are efforts on both sides. So that may also surprise Dan, where they are folks that are discouraged from voting. I've actually went and knocked on doors, and of course, there are just people in society that are frustrated by what they see in the political landscape, and some of that frustration leads people to not want to get involved in.
That's a personal choice not to vote. I don't think we want to make voting mandatory.
I don't know about mandatory, but I mean, there have been pushes, and I'm not opposed to it, to not so much the mandatory, but maybe having a designated day that voting is like almost like a holiday, or that there are things that encourage people
A federal
to go out and
holiday.
vote.
There are those in favor of that. I understand. And that does make sense.
And I'm one of those that would be, amenable to that idea. That's what I was
Let's
looking
get
for.
back to our discussion.
Yeah, let's get back to the discussion.
We also talked about the Mark Robinson race, and surprisingly enough, Disney, which I couldn't believe there's a bill in the floor of the North Carolina legislature to move Disney World to North Carolina. Now, I mean, we'll talk about that in a couple minutes, but I really want Disney World staying in Florida. But, I think it's going to be interesting.
You can have it. You can have it.
I don't want it. I wanted it to be in Orlando. But, I mean, I think it's interesting. This is going to be, I mean, it could very well be that other candidates emerge. But, Dan, it does seem clear to me that it would be better for the Republicans to have DeSantis as the nominee. He is younger. He would appeal to the younger voters. I think Trump, you just bring in a lot of baggage. And I think there's so much Trump fatigue out there. The fact that he didn't do well in the midterms could make it challenging in a general.
First of all, he didn't run in the midterms. He had candidates who ran, but he didn't run, right? And so you're right. I would rather see DeSantis or somebody else. But I'd rather see somebody on the other side too. I mean,
I think a lot of people would.
That's what most Americans are saying. Even are just saying they want to see a new, people run. And so maybe
Steve, I've got a question.
Well, the big money is behind Biden.
No, well, big money's behind. I think both of them and everything.
But
Steve, I do have a question for you, because I have not known that much about that candidate that I'm going to mention and everything. And people say that he is a long shot, does not really have a chance and everything. But I had gotten a video. Ironically, it was not from Lee, but I got a video, and I was actually watching Vivek, the Indian American, speak towards Don Lemons and the encounter with Don Lemons. There was some conversation around race and other things, but I was actually impressed with Vivek. So I was wondering.
He's a really smart man, but I was asked that question today. I didn't know I was going to get this question, but I mean, first of all, Vivek Ramaswamy is a multimillionaire. He sold his company Rovant Sciences. He's an immigrant from India, like my parents. Technology, STEM. Go figure. I think that, but I don't know why Don Lemon was fired. We don't know whether he was fired because of that or some other issue. We do know that John Lemon has been really, quite frankly, there have been times that I feel like he's been not a professional journalist, really using his platform to kind of come in there and attack people. But in this case,
he's crazy.
Yeah, but for Ramaswamy to say, as a presidential candidate, that blacks got all their rights after the Civil War, or that the NRA was created to help blacks. It's just like, come on. I mean, it's not.
Steve, is he wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. He's wrong. I mean, we know that after the Civil War, there was lots of discrimination against blacks. I mean, it wasn't like, blacks were free. They didn't have the right to vote until literally the 60s. And there were all kinds of things. I'm not saying this as a Democrat, it's the facts. Right. So if you're going to run for president, make sure that you have your facts straight. Now, yes, is Ramaswamy smart? Absolutely. Is he capable? Absolutely. You don't come from another country with a few dollars in your pocket and become a multimillionaire. But I just hope that, was Don Lemon out of line? Maybe as a journalist, it's not your job. If somebody comes on the show today and doesn't agree with me, as the host of the show, am I going to attack them?
Yes, you do. You attack me.
Yeah, but we've had a couple of moments, Dan, but I don't do it every day, right? I mean,
kidding.
And Dan, in fairness to Steve, Dan, you and I are not guests.
Right.
Right.
But if I had a guest on the show, I wouldn't go. So
We're
maybe
analysts.
he was fired for that. So I think that in this situation, and I'm going to let others talk, I think Don Lemon, time and time again, I believe that the professional courtesy of a journalist, particularly one hosting a show, is that you don't attack. I don't see Fareed Zakaria attacking. I never saw Tom Brokaw attacking. I don't see Anderson Cooper even attacking when he's doing a show on 60 Minutes or doing a show. He may come in there like Jake Tapper and say, hey, this is the deal. What's up? But he's not going to come in and bring his own personal conviction to attack. So maybe he was laid off for that. I always felt it was unprofessional for him to do that.
Well, I mean, part of the argument that he was making, and to answer Lee's question and everything, was that, as I understood it, part of Vivek's argument was that the right to bear arms was one of the major parts of what was going on in the civil rights struggle. I would argue there was actually some economic factors that were going on, including economic factors for the South and all of that. So I do think that it was some conversations around land ownership and also a number of other kinds of ownerships as well, and property and all in that space. Then that there was definitely some state rights issues that were part of the civil rights struggle, if I'm going to look at that from a historical standpoint. Now, were folks given were there arms that were given during the Civil War? Yes, there were definitely arms. Were there also efforts to take some of those arms with Reconstruction and other kind of periods? Yes, that also took place as well. So I can't say that it was the total wholesale giving of guns to a certain minority group or another. And that's kind of what the argument that Vivek was presenting. So I would have some disagreement with what he was saying. I get where he was going with what he was trying to say, but I don't know that he quite painted it in authentic ways.
Mark, I see it as the Bill of Rights as a package. Either have them or you don't. And part of that is the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. And if you want blacks to have the Bill of Rights, which a lot of people do, coming with that is the Second Amendment. Can't take one without the other.
No, I mean, for freedom of press, freedom of the right to bear arms, and a number of others, I would agree, is part of that. But there were efforts to strip some of those rights, whether that was done, covertly or overtly. That is the question, because even some people not be the biggest fans of a group that I'm getting ready to mention. And ironically, there's a movie about a rapper that came out of that generation and everything that is out now. But the Black Panthers, that is part of what their operation was about, was the fact that they were going to have guns in that area in order to protect themselves against what they felt were menacing threats, and some, including some that I think Dan may agree with, which is like the FBI and the CIA and some of those other factors that were out there as well. So there was some of that was going on, and that has me seen even in other places. I mean, there are folks that want to take literally guns away from the Proud Boys. And I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that either, because I think people have the right to bear arms and protect themselves. I mean, there were folks that wanted to take guns away from Waco and the Waco folks as well. And we saw that invasion take place historically also. So there is some of those times that it is not always protected as much as maybe it should be protected. I'll just leave it at that.
No argument.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think, no argument there. I mean, I think that, it is what it is, right? I mean, but, let's talk about Disney real quick. So we'll come back to the Joe Biden thing. I mean, I think that it's going to be a very interesting race as we get into May, June. You're going to start seeing this thing round out. I think that, first of all, I'll say this. I mean, I think Disney World's always been an icon, an inspiration to millions around the world who come in, and the economic impact is quite amazing. They employ in Central Florida 21,000 people, $75 billion of economic impact, $5 billion of state taxes every year. So this is a big deal, and I just feel like it's gotten so political.
Steve, I just have to ask
who's made it that way? Really Historically, they've been family friendly. That was the motto was.
Right.
But
They
They're
did it
going
to
to move away from
themselves.
there.
Steve, because you said 21,000, that actually seems low to me because I think that's 21,000 probably on the premise itself. Because I'm thinking if you look at Orlando, there's that entire scenario of tourism jobs that are attached to it. So I'm thinking that the impact to Central Florida is greater than the 21,000 because that, and I could be wrong,
Probably.
that could be the entire area, but that seems to me a very low figure. But I can see 21,000 easily just on the campus of Disney and
On
everything.
the
especially-
hotels and everything else,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yeah, the
it's just-
hotels, the resorts,
Yeah.
the cruises. Yeah, I mean, it's just,
Mm.
but anyway, hopefully they'll work it out. I mean, honestly, I don't think Governor DeSantis really wants Disney World to shut down. I mean, that would really shut down the economy. Why would, I mean, maybe they just need to sit down and figure out a way to work this thing out. Hell, he's on his way to run for president anyway. Although,
Do they not need to stay in a warm climate? North Carolina, South Carolina is not 365 days.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I
you
think with
would think
I think with North Carolina, they asked me this today. It really was a political stunt. It doesn't really have any chance of passing, and I think it's basically a statement by Democrats against DeSantis and the "Don't Say Gay" bill and everything. I'm going to go on a limb here. Maybe Disney should just stay, like Dan Worthington said. Maybe this is an example of a large entertainment venue, which you've got Epcot, you've got Universal, you've got all these studios to stay out of politics.
Yeah.
Don't make it just be a theme park. And if they had just done that, would we be here, right? So
Well,
now you got a governor working against them, who won with 65% of the vote, who's running for president, and I don't want to see Disney World. I mean, my wife and I want to go to see the Star Wars exhibit, and I told her, God, maybe we should go now instead of the Grand Canyon because maybe Disney World's going to be closed. She goes, oh no. I'm like, so anyway, I don't know what your all's thoughts are about Disney, but
Well, just wait for it to come to North Carolina, and then just go out your back door, and you can get an annual pass, and it'll all be good.
I don't want to go to. We got Carowinds, we got, you got Kings Island.
Carowinds is an amazing park.
Yeah, and and King's Dominion is just on the other side of Virginia, so I don't know where Disney would fit because there's also the one with the trains that's up there in the mountains. So there's like 3 or 4 amusement parks that are nearby and all in that space. So definitely,
Texas would be a good place for them to go.
Well, who knows? Maybe the Texas governor will try to get them over there, or maybe some of the other Texas folks will try to get them. It's definitely a warm weather area that might be too close to the other Disney, because then you'd have Disney World and Disneyland practically in the backyards of each other.
There's quite a bit of distance between them.
Yeah, that's not that much of it. I mean, there's quite a bit of distance, but it's not as much.
Well,
as Florida,
there's Epstein's Island. I understand it's available.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that could be a available location. I would argue that there have been Disneys in parts of Europe and in parts of other parts of the world that are not exactly the warmest weather places. Now, while I give you that Florida and California are warm weathers, and those are the basic parts of Disney, but Disney Corporation is a very big corporation. It also includes. We do have our cruise show later on today. It also includes the cruise industry, and of course, they go all over the place and everything. And there are some Disney places that are definitely part of their franchise that are in cold weather places. Shucks, didn't Disney used to be in Russia? I believe it was until the whole war in the Ukraine and all in that space.
Hey, I got an idea. Tucker Carlson for president.
Hey, Mike Pence, and so just a couple of things around the world that we're going to go as we continue.
I'm serious. I mean,
Mike, I'm getting some requests to send the live link, so if you can send that, lots of people.
I'll try to put that in there.
Mike Pence appeared. Well, first of all, he spoke at Chapel Hill on Wednesday to a bunch of young Republican students, which is interesting. He's appeared before a Jan 6 grand jury yesterday, and the former vice president spent hours before the federal panel investigating President Trump. He refused demands to overturn the 2020 election results. Hasn't really announced whether he's running for president. Russian attacks in Ukraine killed less 19 people, targeted cities across Ukraine, including Kyiv and the central city of Uman. We'll wait for Sasha to start attack. This was the first missile attack of Kyiv in weeks. Abortion plans failed to pass in Nebraska and South Carolina. The Carol Bryant, who was the Emmett Till accuser, has just died. And Jerry Springer died yesterday. the first round of the NFL drafts has been going on. Alabama's Bryce Young was taken by the Panthers, and number one Houston used the number 2 pick on Ohio State's C.J. Stroud, and that's really about it. Carolina Hurricanes play tonight to advance, hopefully, to the playoffs, although they're playing in New York, and that's really about it. A lot at the table to talk about. Just want to get the ball rolling here. I guess we'll start with Pence. What do you guys think about Vice President Pence, former Vice President?
I don't think he's going to run. If he's not excited about it, why should he run? If he is excited about it, why hasn't he said that?
Well, he probably just can't win.
Well, I mean, is it that he can't win, or is it also that he's still doing that whole exploration thing? Because there are a number of candidates that are still exploring. As a matter of fact, if you had followed the LinkedIn stuff, and I know Lee does a lot of those, but I had not been doing as many as I used to. But I did several over the morning and mostly the morning. But one of them was around the vice presidential candidates and who folks might be excited about, and I definitely had Nikki Haley as one of those that folks might be excited about, and Vivek. But there was also one that has announced earlier this month, and I personally don't know that this candidate, well, both of these candidates that I'm going to mention have a strong chance, but they have thrown their names in the hats, that being Mike Pompeo and Asa Hutchinson. But both of those are out there, and there are a number of others that are considering.
The more crowded the field gets, the better it is for Donald Trump. So, I mean, honestly, and I've said this time and time again, that in a crowded primary, he's going to get his 30%. This is like 2020 or 16 playing out all again. I mean, DeSantis ought to be going to every single one of these people saying that if we're going to take this guy out, if we're going to win, I will say this. I believe that DeSantis can beat Joe Biden. I think if Joe Biden runs against Trump, unfortunately, Dan, I think Biden wins again.
Oh, I think you're right. I have no reason.
I don't understand why the Republicans won't, do a deal with DeSantis and get him out. And look, remember Team of Rivals with Lincoln? I read that.
Yeah.
Here's
the thing. I don't think that Trump has the big money behind him. I think the big money Republican supporters are not going to support Trump this time around. They're looking for someone to support. I think Trump has damaged goods. The Democrats have done a great job of destroying him in every possible way. And I think that the big money is going to be behind somebody else. I don't know who, and I don't think they know yet who that is, but I don't think it's going to be Trump.
Dan, I agree with you, but there are people. Trump has a large following that is loyal to him.
I know, but that won't matter ultimately.
Election day, it will. Election day, it will.
No, the money will. You see, got to remember, first of all, it's not the people who really make these decisions, right? Yeah, even
in elections are irrelevant.
It's the power of politicians and the money that make those decisions. You just watch. My guess is that's true, because I think Trump has damaged goods. I think he knows he's damaged goods. I listened to him the other day. I still agree with him on the issues, but he cannot be the poster boy for making America great again.
I don't agree with all the.
And Biden is.
No, Biden is not. That's the point. Biden shouldn't be the president of a dog shelter right now. He's not capable. And if we give him 4 more years, we will not recognize this country. There'll be nothing left. There'll be nothing left. I mean, we're already losing the U.S. currency as the global reserve currency, right? Because of his policies and his stupidity. I mean, I almost gagged hearing Steve talk about all his supposed accomplishments. Every one of those things were actually not good for the economy, not good for the American people. There is nothing that he has done that actually is good for the American people. A few little things that might have been.
I forgot to talk about it today when I said pandemic relief, but he did get the vaccination program going pretty good. I think we got to give both presidents.
Yeah, but the problem is the vaccine actually was part of the spreader, and it's creating all kinds of health problems in Americans because it was forced on them. Little kids, all this other,
No, I think,
stillbirths, heart problems, all these issues.
I agree. The intent of the legislation. Well, like I said,
okay, so there's some countries that didn't lock down, that didn't go through all this bullshit, and they survived and they thrived and did just fine. That I think that big pharma made a lot of money.
You don't say.
It makes me stinking sick.
Well, I think
that the level of corruption and force that was used by the government over COVID and the amount of civil liberties that were trampled, it was absolutely unconscionable, and it makes them think they have the right to continue to do it. And this Biden government, it isn't him because he's too dementia-filled to really understand. It's his people. They are a threat to what we call democracy and real freedom. They have trampled on our liberties. They are continuing to do so. They, in the name of expanding rights for all these fringe groups that are a small minority in the country, trying to make that seem like the new freedom. It cuts across our freedom.
No, Dan, are we saying that because apparently there was the GOP, and you may agree with this, you may not agree with this, but apparently the GOP was the one that once again blocked the Equal Rights Amendment and the efforts to add that to the Constitution. That was actually blocked yesterday.
Because the Equal Rights Amendment
21 to 47. Hold on a second. So I'm saying that the equal rights of women, because that's what the Equal Rights Amendment is supposed to be about. And
that's not what it was about.
There were some Republicans that voted. Senators Lisa Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine definitely voted with every Democrat. So it definitely.
Mark, what was in the details?
Party line.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Mark, if you ever go read the Equal Rights Amendment and understand what it was about, it wasn't about equal rights for women.
Part of the Equal Rights Amendment, from what I understand, is fair pay.
No, you don't. No, you don't understand what that was all about. And see that a lot of this liberal legislation isn't about what it says. It's like the Reduction Act, right? That was a joke. It had nothing to
Inflation
do with
Reduction Act.
inflation. Had nothing to do with reducing inflation. In fact, it fed inflation. It created a bigger problem. This government, led by Joe Biden and the Democrats, has done more to destroy America and American values than any other government, presidential-led government in the history of America. It has led us down the primrose path to socialism, has weakened the dollar, has weakened us around the world, and has emboldened our enemies.
And that's a good point, though. I've heard Fareed Zakaria talk about that. I'm not really prepared to talk about it in detail today, but the power of the dollar, right? And as the dollar has gotten weaker, it's given other countries the chance to almost weaponize this fact on us, right? And so I think that that's a challenge with, you've got, I'm going to end my comments today on India with just some insights I want to share with my audience about India, not from a foreign policy, but things that we should know about the fifth largest economy that I never knew, which I think are important for us to consider for all of our futures and even around the world. But the weak dollar, I like Dan Worthington. I like the fact that you brought that up because I've heard Zakaria talk about this, that the dollar weakening is actually helping other countries.
Can't hear you.
What?
No, I hear him. I hear him loud and clear.
I hear him fine, Dan.
He must have lost his audio.
Yeah, he probably lost on his side because I'm hearing him loud. I hear you loud and clear. One of the things I was curious about, and it's coming back to something that Dan said earlier and all in that space, because there's definitely some things that are politically divisive, and I would say politically divisive on both sides, because apparently over there in Nebraska and South Carolina, anti-abortion bills failed. And that was the other thing that I saw in the news. So I don't know, some people may be glad about that, and some people may not be very sad about that. But that is in GOP-controlled areas that those anti-abortion bills failed, because there are definitely folks that want more rights in that space, and we are going to see state by state now that Roe versus Wade happened, and all along those lines, or the reversal of Roe versus Wade. But in those two states, which are GOP-controlled states, there was a turn back from some of that, and all in that space. And ironically, man,
but that's what it was all about. Mark, it's about the individual states determining what that's going to be about. That's what it's about. And I'm okay with that. That's the only thing that the Supreme Court decided, was it's up to the states to decide. So if the majority of the people decide that in a particular state that the law wants to be one way, that's fine. That's for them to decide, because that's what Dobbs was all about. It was about saying that this is not a federal constitutional right. This is something to be determined by the states. This
But
thing will be
Dan,
worked.
but Dan,
This
don't
thing
you
will be
feel,
worked out.
but
This
Dan,
thing will
don't you
be
feel
worked
that we
out.
then go into, we talk about division here, but don't you feel that we then run into the situation that existed historically before, where folks go to the states that are more pleasing? Say, for example, North Carolina, which can be a swing state, but can sometimes be very conservative, votes the opposite direction. Does that mean that everybody that wants to have that abortion flocks to South Carolina because of what South Carolina's rules
Well,
are?
I mean, there are a lot of states other than South Carolina. I mean, it's
I'm just
like
using an example because they're right next to each other, North and South Carolina.
it doesn't really matter. People can go wherever they want to go. I mean, it's a plane ticket, right? You get on a plane, you go, you have your procedure, you come back, whatever you want to do. And right
Mark,
now,
that's not uncommon. I'm sure you know this, that teenagers, they go to different states because of liquor laws or smoking, they buy cigarettes.
No, I
Yeah,
I went
or
to school in
fireworks
Milwaukee.
or
That used to
whatever.
be very common. That's
Fireworks is a great example.
That's a very famous line from the Blues Brothers, because Wisconsin had more liberal liquor laws than, say, Illinois. So definitely that.
Yeah.
something
So
that
this is
happened.
not a big deal, and everybody's trying to make it a big deal. And they want to make it because it's politically charged, it's divisive, and so they want to fight over it rather than.
Dan, there's another issue here also. There are those that want to blur the line or get rid of them and not have 50 states anymore. They just want one United States. That's it, America. They don't want different laws.
That's right.
That's not the way the country was set up.
No, 10th Amendment. The Constitution of the United States is a limited form of government. Those rights that were not specifically granted to Congress and the president are reserved to the states. And that's the way the Constitution is, because we're not a country. We're a country. We're a republic. We're not a democracy.
But to Lee's point, what do you think? Because there are still efforts out there, some that may be approving of it, but they've been out there forever as well. And, they'll generate some interest, but there are folks who would like it not to be 50 states. There are still folks who are interested in it possibly being as many as 52 or 53, because I do know that the Puerto Rican independence movement is still very much a thing out there. There are still folks who would like DC to become a state of its own, and there are folks that want some of the other properties.
That's a separate issue, Mark, and I hear your point. That's not getting rid of the lines between the 50 states. That's just adding more states, and that's a different issue.
And that's political gerrymandering for one party to gain power over the other. That's all. That's what that's about.
And gerrymandering is another issue for another time. But I do believe that there's too much of that going on in the U.S. I mean, no political party should be deciding who their voters are, and whether it's Republican or Democrat. I mean, it's ridiculous. People are drawing lines that so they can get their own
lines so much.
Power.
Yeah.
I mean, and look, and what I'm saying is it's not right for, if you give, it's like as a young kid, when, my mother used to have a candy jar open in the house when we were kids. And I used to take the candy when I shouldn't eat candy. And my mom was like, she used to say,
is your mom listening now?
No, she said, just because you can do something doesn't mean you do it.
Right.
Just because the candy jar is open doesn't mean it's okay for you to do that. Right. So the thing is, we're having elections, and then the Democrats or the Republicans are going in North Carolina and saying, well, let's go switch the lines so that we can debunk this guy in and get the majority, rather than saying, let's have an election and get these people out. But my thing is, I'm not trying to attack the Republicans. I think that the Democrats do the same thing. The Democrats,
they do.
Speaking of folks in the attack level, there was a third-party candidate that definitely played a role in some past elections that apparently on yesterday said that he is not going to do it. And again, he's part of the older crowd as well. But this time around, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has said that he doesn't see many alternatives to supporting President Biden for re-election. And so,
well, yeah, he's given Bernie everything he wanted.
So he did try before, and he's saying that he doesn't going to run this time around. But he says, I don't think one has many alternatives. What's at stake, of course, is what he's saying, is the future of American democracy. And he definitely did some talking points that is divisive in of itself, because one of the quotes that he says is, what's at stake is whether we have some right-wing demagogue running this country or a pathological liar, somebody who's trying to divide us up, or whether we reelect somebody who is a very decent human being who's trying to do the opposite, trying to bring the American people together.
So Biden is not a pathological liar and a bad human being?
Apparently, according to Sanders, not. And like I said,
well, that's because Sanders is a liar and not a good human being. So there you go.
Right.
Well, I mean, there are some interesting other candidates. Like I said, right now, Biden faces two oppositions, one from the whole kind of world of astrology and that kind of interesting kind of world, because so far the only, like Steve just said, there's a crowded Republican field, but so far the Democratic contenders, and there may be others to jump in, is Robert Kennedy Jr., President Biden, and the one that I was alluding to, Marianne Williamson, who knows, she might get the endorsement of.
And we have Lee.
Mark, why do you think the DNC does not want debates with Biden and Kennedy?
Say what?
Why do you think the DNC does not want debates before the primaries between Biden and anyone?
They're probably trying to
Kennedy or
they probably. Well, I mean, look, I think
they're taking sides. It's a fixed.
No, I think. Well, let me take a stab at this as an analyst. I think that what Biden does have going for him now is a relatively united party. You know, I think it's going to be hard. I don't know whether the DNC, I think you're right, Lee. I think any candidate running for re-election should be open to debating anybody on the issues, right? And anybody has the right to run for anything they want. But it could be a chance, it could be a way of discouraging other Democrats to run, knowing, well, if I don't have the chance to debate him, he's already an incumbent, right? I don't see him getting a fend off from, like, you know, AOC or someone from the progressive left. And if Newsom doesn't run, then, you know, and Kamala isn't going to run against him, then, you know, he's going to win the nomination, right? And so,
all Kamala has
as
to do
a
is
very
wait
weak
for him to
candidate,
what?
a very weak candidate he's going to be.
Yeah,
if he's just pushed in there, you know.
Well, like I said on the show today, you have an unpopular incumbent president who only won. I call him, as Fareed Zakaria says, the accidental president. Joe Biden won for two reasons: COVID and Donald Trump.
That's it.
100%.
Think about this. He didn't in 1988. He pulled out of the race. There were plagiarism charges. In I don't know the details of it. 2008, he pulled out of Iowa. He was at 4%. He was trailing in the single digits until Jim Clyburn endorsed him in South Carolina, right?
I know.
And the thing is, he ended up winning, right? And so, but I tell you, I never in my lifetime thought I would see this. You have a Democratic president and incumbent. Only 26% of his party wants him to run again, and much of the country doesn't want to. But you have Donald Trump as well. Only 26% want him, and these are the respective nominees of each party. So my God, it's like
picking from the worst list, and that we've said this before in other lectures. I did have another question. I'd love to hear both of y'all's thoughts on this, or all three of your thoughts on this. But there is some conversations around whether there should be oversight even in their various groups, whether that's the Senate, whether that's the House, and now the Supreme Court justices. And apparently the justices are pushing back on that because they are saying that it raises more questions than it actually clarifies. So how much should there be oversight with some of these groups that are very powerful and all in that space? Because apparently all 9 Supreme Court justices were pushing back on it. So it wasn't a Democrat or Republican.
Mark, who would be doing the oversight on the Supreme Court justices, for example? Who would be doing the oversight?
I mean, that would be a good question. I mean, there's some folks who want there to be
Democrats.
oversight. I mean, there was questions. There are people, and y'all have alluded to it, that wanted oversight on the elections because there are people on both sides.
That's not over people. That's not over Congress. Over.
So, do we?
So yeah, 3 separate
number of groups. I mean, there are people that want oversight on what the tax groups do in the sense of the, and Dan has alluded to it, there are people that want more oversights on the FBI and the CIA and definitely the IRS. So is that something that we need more oversight in some of these government agencies? Because
but the Supreme Court is an independent branch of the government. They are there and supposed to be independent for a reason. They're not supposed to be interfered with by Congress or the president, by the FBI, the CIA, by rioters or people who are trying to kill justices. They are supposed to be an independent branch.
They're also supposed to be nonpartisan, and I don't know that
Oh,
they are
God.
all nonpartisan, because they are definitely some on both sides that take different stands.
They're not supposed to be nonpartisan. They're supposed to interpret the Constitution of the United States.
I think politics.
In a
But when
nonpartisan
you're
way,
interpreting
Dan.
the Constitution, that is not partisan. You're supposed to interpret it according to the way that the Constitution is written, not because of some Republican or Democratic.
Well, okay, you want to
ideals.
go there. So what do you use? Original intent, or do you use some sort of penumbra argument that Justice Douglas used to justify Roe v. Wade? I mean, Roe v. Wade was never based on the Constitution of the United States as it was written. That theory was pulled out of the air by Justice Douglas, an argument that there were a penumbra of rights under the Constitution. And it was a lame argument then. And that's what Dobbs said. Basically, it was a lame argument then. It's a lame argument now.
No, I'm just asking
And
about
so it wasn't a partisan decision. It was based on conservative judges tend to be originalists. They tend to interpret concrete.
Yeah, but strict. But here's
right.
But here's the thing
That's
that
right.
doesn't make sense. First of all, Dan, I know you're a law professor. I agree with you. Justices should be interpreting the law, and they're conservative justices that believe in strict constructionism, and then you have more liberal justices. So in political science, we talked about Larry Tribe.
So anything goes. Anything goes.
Yeah, but the problem is, here's the thing. I do believe outside influences are influencing these justices, both on the right and the left, right? I mean, the thing about it is that conservative courts are normally conservative in terms of conservative courts are usually more adhering to stare decisis. But this court, under the Republican majority, has been changing the law a lot, right? Now, at the same time, I would say that we don't want Democratic justices doing the same thing, packing the courts, doing these things, getting the Congress involved, getting the president involved. I think the Supreme Court should be 9 people. But I think that we need to make some changes. I think there should be term limits. We shouldn't allow these people to be in there for life, right? And Clarence Thomas was taking all of these perks, vacations and stuff. I mean, it's like, even though we can't get him, there's nothing legal about it. No justice should be taking gifts from anybody, whether they were appointed by a Democratic president or a Republican president.
I agree with you on that. But one thing that, speaking of people taking money, and I know Dan's going to love this one, apparently one of the things that Joe Biden is urging, and it comes back to money in politics, is he is urging the Wall Street donors to, quote unquote, fill the $1 billion plus campaign war chest. So definitely, and I'm sure Trump will do the same, and whoever else the Republican nominee is. But I think that the lobbyists are going to have a lot of power, and they have had a lot of power in the past, including that one we were just talking about, the pharmaceutical lobbies and the gun lobbies. So that's something we need to find a way to get rid of, is some of this money influences.
Yes,
and I would argue.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. That is what, okay, look, here's what I think. The system that we have today is a large result because of outside money and outside special interests coming in. There was a time in the U.S. Congress where you could not raise money out of, when you were in Washington, you were there to do your business for the people of this country. Mm-hmm. And then you would leave and go back to your districts to raise money. Now they got a place they rent out where the congressmen walk over on their lunch break and they're dialing for dollars. They're hosting these lobbying receptions. It's pay to play on all these groups, and it's taking the government away from the people. And I think, yes, Dan Worthington has said on past shows that corporations have a right to influence on policy, yes, but I don't think a corporation is a person. A corporation doesn't vote. Why are we so I think campaign finance report across the board. I think there should be finance limits on presidential, Senate elections, gubernatorial elections. There should be limits, and we need to get it back to like it was in the 1980s when Jimmy Carter ran against Ronald Reagan. They didn't have to raise $1 billion to be the president. They had to run on their record and have a conversation about their differences, and then the American people would vote for them. We weren't influenced. And I'm seeing this in North Carolina, where to win a competitive legislative seat in North Carolina, you have to raise $500,000. To be governor of this state, you have to raise 10 to 12 million. To be a United States senator, you have to raise 25, 30 million. And to be the president of the United States, you need to raise $1 billion.
It's ridiculous.
Do any of us, and regardless of our political persuasion, I think all of us on the World Edition team agree that like Dan Worthington, I plead my case. He and I have different on issues, but he agrees with me. This is ridiculous.
I do.
No, it is definitely, it's totally ridiculous and
You know
everything.
how
I
much-
know we're winding down. I know you got some things you want to say about India. I do have to have some lighthearted questions as we wind down on Friday. But one of the things is apparently the South Korean president came and brought the house down, apparently by singing American classics. So apparently he had a good time by singing American Pie and all in along those lines. So maybe politicians from other parts of the world can have a good time when they come and visit us.
Throw my Chevy to the levee. The levee.
Mark, you want to show a clip?
I'm gonna try to find a clip for tomorrow if I don't find one right now. I might try to see if I can find one right now, but that might be a good way to.
He doesn't beginning his singing tour.
Maybe the president should have a sing-off. What do you think?
A sing-off to determine the presidency? Hey,
Yeah,
I mean,
Bill Clinton can play the saxophone.
Yeah, nobody wants to see.
This is
Biden
true.
dance. No one wants to see Biden dance.
nobody wants to see Biden dance, you said?
No. See, he went to the one church, remember, and he was looked like he was.
We've got Sasha on. I do know Sasha's got his show coming
look
up
at Sasha.
in that space and everything.
Missile strike in Kyiv. Just real quickly, can you give us a quick update before we end the show?
Well, this is a continuation of Putin's strategy to intimidate Ukrainian people, army, the decision-making centers. Especially funny is that it comes after a telephone call between Zelensky and Emperor Xi. It's in a way it's distraction, this telephone call. However, Zelensky was not in a position to refuse to make this call, and he did. And Xi was obliged to take this call because if he's trying to create a peace between Ukraine and Russia, and he spent at least 3 days in Moscow, and not to take call from Zelensky wouldn't bode well for him as a peacemaker. So he did take this call. By now, nobody knows really what they discussed. We can only guess, but hopefully next few days we'll find out about that. And so Russia is continuing this war of attrition. Ukrainian attack is imminent. It's coming, hopefully. There are some weather issues. However, it's coming, I'm pretty sure, in next week, maximum 2. So that's where we are. And the Russians are definitely trying to also to mount some kind of an attack on their own here and there. And the Ukrainians so far are very successfully rejecting any advances of Russian troops. For last day, the Russians lost about 600 people and some of technique. So it shows that it's kind of stabilizing in some ways. But I'm pretty sure if you will look at the whole front line, there are a few points where Russian made a little advances, and Ukrainian has not made any advances. They're just preparing grounds with artillery shells, rockets, and so on. So they're very carefully preparing them.
Well, there's an argument to be made that when Russia does this kind of stuff, it opens itself up for retaliation in its cities. This is an act of cowardice, and it's an act of terrorism. That's the purpose of it. And if they're going to be acting like that, they deserve some of the same. I believe it's wrong for them to continue to do this.
And on the latest count, there are 54 or so countries in the world who are opposing the Russian war in Ukraine. So in a way, Russia is prepared to fight the rest of the world, essentially, because we are talking about 54 countries.
Sasha, they may be opposed to Russia, but are they trading with Russia?
Trading with Russia. Well, trading in Russia is obviously something what sanctions were supposed to stop. They are mostly successful, but there is some trading with Russia still going
Yeah.
on.
I'm going to go ahead and
The
begin.
BRICS countries.
Mark,
Yeah, we got the monologue, so go to your monologue. By the way, just really quickly, I don't know whether you and Nick are glad that Bryce was picked, but as a sports person, I am definitely think that that could be great for the Carolina franchise. So who knows, maybe we're going to return to glory in that sport. And like you said, hopefully the Hurricanes will win and all in that way. But Bryce does seem like a good quarterback and all in that kind of space. So we'll see what happens.
well, it's time for my final take. So, Mark, bring me to my solo closeout. I wanted
Yeah,
to
you can go to the solo closeout. And by the way, Lee, if you stick after his closeout, I did find that video. So that might be what we use for the closeout.
I'm going to watch.
Well, let me finish up my comments first, and then.
Yes.
So my final take is that this last week, last week we hosted the Indian ambassador in Morrisville to kick off our Indian American diaspora event. But that day I had the honor of having lunch with the ambassador, the governor, the commerce secretary in the governor's mansion. And I wanted to share with World Edition a couple of things I learned about India that I thought were very fascinating for all of us around the world to listen to. First of all, the ambassador expressed to us that India today, 65% of the population is under the age of 26. What this means is that the global talent pool is huge for India in the global economy. It's amazing, and it was quite amazing to see that the number there, that the amount of global talent in India could be a significant factor in terms of their economic growth as the fifth largest economy in the world. Also, a large growing middle class in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Now, the second point he wanted to make, when we say tier 2, 3, these are poorer villages. Now, the second point I want to emphasize before I leave is the internet access. 5 years ago, India only had a couple thousand people connected to the internet in rural villages. Today, that number, believe it or not, is 340 million people. 340 million Indians in villages that never had access to the internet now have access to the internet. This is having a profound impact on their innovation, their IoT, and also startups. A few years ago, there was only a few thousand startups. Today in India, there's 100,000 startups and 30 are unicorns, billion-dollar companies. Unbelievable. The final point I'll make is that there's an opportunity for trade and investment, and yes, moving the needle in foreign policy. But the reason I wanted to share these data points with you is that we often forget that the war for global talent, the war for the new 50 million jobs that John Chambers thinks we can get in the next decade, the war for that talent is going to occur in other parts of the world. And the United States of America has no longer the strongest dollar. We may have the greatest military and still the best infrastructure in the world, but I think it's clear to say that others want to be number one. It was very clear to me from the ambassador that a young India, that a vibrant India, that a skilled India is ready for the battle to be number one. Make no mistake, they're preparing. And I think it's better for the U.S. to have a great relationship with number one India than any other country. Hopefully we can work on the strategy of what we can do to neutralize them with Russia. But
China.
I wanted to end my remarks today, these unbelievable statistics. And we are trying to deploy broadband in America, here even in North Carolina, and the nation of India in the span of 5 years has given internet access to 340 million. I'll end my monologue with a story. The ambassador a few years ago met someone in New York who had just sold his company for a few $100 million. When he asked him where he was from, the businessman said that he was from the poorest village in India, which they actually call hell on earth. He worked 4 jobs, was able to get a lot of his training and education online, find his way to the United States of America, where he was able to invest in himself, get training, and eventually found and started a company after he became a citizen, and today is a multimillionaire. That story would have been impossible years ago with the system in India in place. And the fact that it can happen so quickly, so suddenly, shows me that the world definitely has changed. We're going to talk about this in the coming months of the show, but I just wanted to end my comments today. I want to thank you all for being with me. We'll see you on another edition of World Edition next week, and I'll be coming on more at the end of every week to wrap up the weeks if I'm not available during the week because of work. From our family to yours, be safe wherever you are. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.
And
Bye-bye.
sounding good.
Take
And
care,
right now
Steve.
we're going to play that video that I said we were going to play as well. So I actually had loaded that up and all in those spaces. So we're going to play that video and all in
Have a nice day.
American Pie as sung by that great governor and all in that kind of way. And definitely we are looking forward to that. And this should be a fun little video that folks will enjoy as we get ready to get on out of here. But here's the South Korean president singing American Pie.
A long, long time ago. I can still remember how that music used to make me smile.
This is one of your favorite songs, American Pie.
아메리칸 파이가 가장 좋아하는 곡 중에 하나시라고 들었습니다. Yes, that's true. Yes, when I was going to school, it was one of my favorite songs.
Well, we wanted to hear you sing it.
A long, long time ago. Something touched me deep inside the day. The music